Blake is a software developer who graduated from James Madison University with a degree in computer science. He now works as a consultant for Accenture. Blake and I sit down to discuss computer science and his experience in the industry. This is also a two-part episode, and in part two, Blake and I discuss his involvement with Drive Fitness. Enjoy episode 5 of the Drive Fitness podcast. Other than Matthew Jamazos, Blake is one of my first software developers on the podcast. So, Blake, I wanted to ask you, for those who are kind of more into fitness, what is software development? What is computer science? Can we kind of just start from, the basics for a minute?
Yeah. And I think it's important for everyone to kind of have knowledge on that, especially because it's what runs our entire system, the world, right? And so many people don't know kind of at a high level how it works, or like it's this magic type thing. So software development really at its core is just about using technology to create things that make our lives better or enhanced or easier. And it's a very broad sense. Computer science is a very broad term that spans across a bunch of different types of computer-related stuff, whether it's the actual hardware, or if it's making mobile applications, or if it's researching into artificial intelligence, security. Like, there's so many different realms of it. But at a high sense, it's just about taking the hardware of a computer and writing code to being able to translate that into something that a human can digest and interact with.
So when you are writing code, right, you use a language that is not, like a human language. It's something that the computer can understand. And can you kind of explain for those who have never looked at like a computer language what that is or what it feels like? I know it's mostly logic, right? If this statement do this statement, but what is the best way you can kind of explain that to someone who's never seen computer code?
Yeah, and I think the best way to kind of explain it, exactly what you said, logic, right? That is, you're basically giving commands, and that's what the language is about. It's giving commands to the computer in a way that it understands. So you're writing out, step 1, do this, step 2, do this, 3, 4, so on and so forth. So it's a way of being able to communicate commands to the computer. And there are multiple different formats, right? Just like you can give commands to another human in various languages. You can do the same thing with programming languages, yeah.
And I know that computers, they just run off of ones and zeros. So something I don't even fully understand is when I get my computer language that I know is something more the computer can understand, how does that get translated into ones and zeros?
No, that is magic. No, no. But basically there's levels of translation that happens. There's ones and zeros, which is just on or off, and then it kind of goes higher and higher levels. So you have assembly language, compiler language. So basically, you can do the same things when you're writing computer language if you wrote purely in ones and zeros, but people have created these programming languages to help make it easier to write code, because it's a lot easier to look at and understand and write bigger applications if you're not just writing ones and zeros. So basically, it starts out at those ones and zeros. Somebody wrote something that abstracts it a little higher and uses assembly language. Somebody writes a compiler that abstracts it even more and kind of turns it into a human readable format instead of just numbers. So it's easier for people to jump on board and start learning and start creating.
That all makes sense to me. And recently I heard that Google had basically mastered something called quantum supremacy, which essentially they were saying that it used quantum computing, which means, instead of the normal ones and zeros, it could essentially like double that and turn... We were texting about it, but do you understand kind of how that works?
Yeah, and it's something that's really confusing, right? Even for me, I don't even fully understand it. I just kind of grasp the main concept of it. And the main concept of it is just, we're talking about ones and zeros, right? And the idea is just, okay, but what if it was more than just ones and zeros. So basically, the goal of quantum computing is basically doubling the amount of information and stuff that you can write in the same amount that a normal computer would do. So it's no longer 1 and 0. It's now basically you have 4 options to choose from, and it can be any of those 4 options. So it makes it much more powerful. It can do things much more quickly because you have more information in one bit instead of just 2 pieces of information.
So I guess every bit could then act as a 1 or a 0, leading to have much more different combinations, right? And it felt like, I don't know, that was announced a couple of weeks ago and no one was really paying attention to it. I guess no one really understands at the moment like what implications that could have, right? Do you have any idea? I think that's why no one was making a big deal about it, but do you have any theories on what implications that could have on society?
Yeah, so that is a great point, and it's something I thought about too, because it's something about, you have this technology, but is there a need for it yet? And maybe eventually down the road the need for this will rise, but people are doing really a lot of stuff, their day-to-day stuff, without the need for quantum computing. But there are kind of 2 applications that I see that it turns into. Number one, I think it's going to completely disrupt security in a way. So traditionally, when you're trying to break into a computer, when you're trying to get someone's password, you have to go through a lot of computation to get there. And current standards take a current computer a long time to break that. But once we have quantum computers, which are way more powerful and can do things in a way shorter amount of time, suddenly those algorithms can be cracked in, a day. So to combat that, I see, okay, now we're going to have quantum encryption to be able to balance that out. And if you don't upgrade to that, then any hacker or nefarious person with a quantum computer could potentially break into your system relatively easily because it's not up to date in that sense. And then the final one is just the ability for simulations and the ability for modeling being a lot higher. One thing I like to think about is kind of like the real world. There's a lot of math going on around us at every time, right? There's physics going on, there's gravity, like everything has some force applied to it, and there's some equation going on around you that you can't really see. And I think with a better computer and a processor that can handle all these calculations at once, we'll be able to do better simulations of maybe just modeling, but maybe eventually virtual reality, right? Where you have the ability to make things more lifelike because the computer can actually handle all those calculations around you at the same time, because current computers aren't powerful enough to do that. So that's kind of where I see it going from my sense.
Yeah, no, that was a good point about virtual reality. It seems like our phones are getting better every year, right? But we've kind of hit this peak of fitting a computer into a small enough device that we can put in our pocket. And sure, we can make it smaller, but it's pretty comfortable to carry around a phone. But when it comes to virtual reality, right, it seems like we're very much lacking the potential here. We have these either clunky devices or these things that adapt to our phones, and it's not quite, it's exciting. Virtual reality is very exciting, but it's not quite where it could be. And we're all working towards a way to compress that down into a smaller device, or like, a pair of glasses or something that can be more seamlessly used. And maybe this quantum computing can really push us to the point where VR, hits this level that we kind of want it to be.
Yeah, no, and that's definitely true. And it's really interesting too when you're talking about virtual reality, about kind of where you envision it going, right? Because like you can go to this full-on virtual reality where everything is synthesized around you, or there's augmented reality where it's real life combined with some virtual reality to kind of show you things in combination with what you're actually seeing. And I think there are arguments for both sides. But what do you think? Do you think the future is in virtual reality, like completely virtualized realities, or something somewhere in the middle where it's real life with augmentations?
I think that augmented reality is going to be something that everybody uses in their everyday lives. I think that we're living in this weird period of time where we're staring at screens all the time, and I think this is going to be a little blip in the long-term history of things. I think that working 50 years from now, you're going to be typing on a keyboard, but your screens are going to be more projected in your vision, and you're not going to be as limited, to what you can do on a screen. You're going to be able to kind of jump in and out of web browsing like easier and more seamless with augmented reality kind of layered over your eyes in some way, shape, or form. And then I think that virtual reality will be like either special occasion thing or just a small portion of the population will be very, very into virtual reality. I don't think that it's going to be like a everyday kind of activity or every person or profession kind of activity. It's going to be not something that everyone's going to go do, but for the people that do it, I think that there's huge implications on learning skills like, how to do a surgery. You could go into VR and learn a lot of skills there that you would have to practice over and over again, in real life. So yeah, I think that there is a lot of potential with VR, but not everyone's going to tap into that the same way that like cell phones are just everyone has those. It's a standard piece of technology. I do think augmented reality is going to kind of layer over top of us in a way where everyone is going to need it to kind of function in the world, to be honest.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a good comparison with cell phones too, because I almost see it as like augmented reality is like the smartphone, whereas virtual reality is like your desktop computer. One's you don't use your desktop computer all the time, but it's for that kind of heavy lifting when you really need to be immersed. So maybe for your work or for other things, but all the rest of the time is just augmented reality.
Yeah. Kind of like video games too, right? Like not everybody plays. A lot of us play video games, but not everybody sits around and wants to play video games for 3-4 hours a day. Those same people, I think, are going to be sitting in VR, right, doing those kind of activities where it's going to be cool, it's going to be fun to mess around with, but it's not going to be a necessary part of kind of getting through society. Let's say I'm a high schooler and I'm about to graduate and I'm considering computer science as a major. Do you have any advice for beginner programmers? Do you have any advice for even deciding if this is the right major for you?
To kind of start out, you should just kind of research online. One of the great things is there's so much content on the internet to start programming. And if there's something that interests you in particular, whether maybe it's game development or if it's mobile app development, web development, just kind of look at the free courses and watch some YouTube tutorials on that. And that'll kind of give you a broad picture of what programming is like. And that won't give you the full scope into computer science because it's so much more. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's such a strong basis for it. It'll kind of give you that idea because the way to go about thinking about programming is such a unique mindset. And that's why a lot of people will say, everyone should learn how to program just because you can apply it outside because it's such a logical, it's just problem solving, right? It's like I think if you're enjoying problem solving, you enjoy being given a toolbox and you've been given a problem and you are said to fix it and you figure out how to fix that problem with the tools at your disposal, that's kind of up your alley and you should start exploring that. So following those YouTube tutorials and seeing where you kind of lie and what kind of realm you want to go into computer science. And that's kind of how I got started too in finding the particular lane, right? Like they teach you stuff at college about broad computer science, but to go into those individualized topics, when I started mobile app development, when I guess I was like 17, 18, I was watching tutorials, I was reading things online, I was following content creators, and that's kind of really awesome way to get your start and to figure out if it kind of suits what you're looking for or what interests you.
I'd taken some courses in college, but I really learned a lot once I had my own idea, or like you said, I picked my own problem and I started trying to solve that problem. I felt like it was much more engaging to kind of go online and find things that helped me kind of fit my problem or fit my interests. You don't just have to be interested in computer science. You could have a totally different problem you're trying to solve. Like for me, it was fitness. And now you're using computer science as a tool, to help you in this other area. And it just automatically engages you, right? And allows you to learn without just going through tutorial videos or just, researching computer science topics. And you just kind of naturally start learning these things ahead of time. What about a beginner language? Do you have any suggestions on maybe what's the easiest language to start off with when you're just learning the basics of computer science?
When you're looking for a beginning language, you kind of want to look for something that's not too strict or too daunting, but also still follows some of the best guidelines and principles. So that way you're really getting the kind of the full picture of things even when starting out. I think Python's a really good place to start because it's really easy to get up and running and to start coding there. But I think one of the best ways to get started out when you're learning, I would take a look into web development. I would try to create a website using JavaScript, whether it's a certain library such as Angular or React, because that will give you kind of the full scope of how things are structured, even in big enterprise companies. And it's a little more tangible, right? Because you get to see the feedback. And that's one of the cool things we were talking earlier about, trying to solve your own problem, how more engaging that is, right? Like you start out with an idea and you take your first step. And then when it's time to move on to the next thing, you're like, okay, I want profile pictures in this. So I'm Googling, how do I implement profile pictures in my website? And it kind of just builds from there. So I really think a website is a great place to start because it's something that you can feel and you get immediate feedback on. Whereas if you're just starting with a language by itself without any visual elements, it can just seem really disconnected from you and it's not as concrete in a way.
Mm-hmm. So maybe if you're more into like artistic stuff and like designing the look of a website, you might want to start more with website design, which is usually HTML language to set up the elements on the website, and then a language called CSS, right, that kind of formats it, styles it, puts colors into it, size, all that. So if you're more into the look, if you're more of a visual learner of how to create the look and feel for how a website would look, start there. But then, as you were saying, Python is maybe someone who's more of like a mathematician, more into algorithms, more into like solving problems like on the calculation end, right? So maybe Python's is a good language to start over there if that's kind of more of your interest.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the style of person you are, right? Like I am one that really likes that visual feedback and I really enjoy making and creating things. And a website feels like you're, architecting or creating or drawing. And then the actual code behind it, if you're doing Python or things of that nature, is more of that mathematical kind of. So if you're a data person, if you're a numbers person, if you're a really logical person, then that I would say Python's a great start for you. Yeah.
Okay. So you went through JMU's computer science program. I know they started you off with Java. What was your impression of their program? What was some of your biggest takeaways? And other than Java, what kind of other languages did you hone in on?
We started out with Java, and we started out with a intro to programming fundamentals, which was based in Java. And that was kind of the prereq class to continue forward in the computer science major. And that one was a really interesting setup because it's kind of like feast or famine, because if you don't do well in that one, you can't continue on. And there's a reason for that, because if you don't learn that stuff, then you're going to have a very difficult time going further, because that kind of is the foundation and it kind of serves as your point of reference moving deeper and deeper. So it's really important in that sense, but it's so new and so overwhelming to people that it's more about finding people that are dedicated to figuring this out and learning about it, right? Like I feel like anybody can learn how to code. It's just whether or not people want to put in the time or effort. So I felt like that was a really great class to kind of set the standard while also giving you some real world experience, even if it was extremely hard. And from there, we kind of branched out further into data structures, algorithms. I touched on Python a bit. I've touched on SQL, and then it kind of transitions into C, which is really a low-level language. It's a little more complicated than Java in a sense. You can do more. You can interact more directly with the hardware with it, and that's kind of the upper-level, senior-level CS classes. And that was really, really hard stuff, but it really gives you the full scope of kind of computer science, because it's combining your point of reference there at the very beginning, but now you're really diving deep into the actual hardware and how computers operate. And I think one of the hardest classes for me actually was operating systems. So, everyone uses Mac OS or Windows, right? But starting to try to code your own, that's when things get a little crazy, right? Like how does a computer operate? How does a OS work like that? How can it run multiple tabs or multiple programs at once? These are all really complicated problems, and you start kind of taking it piece by piece. But overall, I think the program was really awesome, and I thought that it gave me a good broad sense of kind of each kind of sect of computer science. And then from there, it's up to the individual to choose, all right, which one did I enjoy the most? Which one do I want to continue down the path of learning on?
So earlier we were talking about ones and zeros, right? And when you talk about a low-level programming language like C, you're saying that that language is closer to speaking in ones and zeros language. Not necessarily ones and zeros, but it's closer down towards the actual hardware, the way the computer understands things, than just a minute ago we were talking about website design. That's almost as far away as you can get, right, from that computer language. And I think this is true from my understanding, but the syntax, right? So the rules that come along with a language, the further away you get from that computer language, like the computer understanding, the easier they are, right? They're not as rigorous. I know I use JavaScript a lot, which is for website design, and you can kind of get away with a lot, right? As long as the computer can kind of figure out what you want, your code won't break, it won't refuse to run. When you get down to like a language like C, right, does that come with a much more rigorous set of rules? It essentially won't compile or won't run unless you type it a specific way. Is that correct to say?
Well, yes, in a sense, but I think as far as rideability goes, it's not that different from kind of a mid tier. But you're absolutely right. Where when you're taking a look at those high level like HTML and CSS, which CSS in and of itself is not really traditionally speaking a language, because it's a style sheet, right? But then when you're talking about a low level programming language, it's more about, in Java you set a variable, right, and and it kind of handles that for you, and a variable is just the storing something in memory to use later. And you don't worry about how that's stored. The computer worries about that. It abstracts that away because it's easier to read. It's easier to write programs faster because you don't have to worry about that. But in C, you can tell it where in memory you want it to be stored. So you can actually say, yeah, store it in this particular spot in memory. And the problem with that is it's really easy to mess up. So it not necessarily won't compile, but it's really easy to crash the system because you're trying to access something that doesn't exist, or you're getting into issues where you're running out of memory space. There's a lot of problems that come with that, but there's also a lot of power that comes with that too. You can do a lot more.
Not only, maybe the syntax does get a little harder, but you're saying more importantly than the syntax, the rules with it is you're going to have to be much more specific to how you're talking to it. So when I deal with like an upper level code, I can just say, hey, this mic equals M, right? But down there on a level like C, you might have to say, hey, this mic equals M on the table, right? You got to tell it where it's going to be placed as well. And then when you want to grab the mic, you got to tell it, hey, give me that mic from the table. You can't just continuously grab this mic, and let the computer understand where it is, right?
Right.
Okay.
And what's interesting too is at the end of the day, all the programming languages kind of work like that, right? But it's the level of abstraction, right? So at the end of the day, a higher level program works the exact same way, but you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to deal with that. So it's kind of interesting that, how high level of a view you want or want to deal with.
That's really interesting because I guess as we were talking about how it evolved, from ones and zeros all the way to something like a website language that a lot of the abstraction is already done for you. Do you think that over time it's still going to be important for like everyone to learn how to code? I feel like eventually we're going to abstract coding all the way to the point where it's English, where I can type in, hey, I want a fitness app that does this, this, and this, and the computer will compile it and like solve it all for me, right? I feel like eventually, I don't know how soon, we're going to reach that point where the computer understands English, and that is like the highest level of abstraction, and all the other problems underneath that would already be figured out. Is that fair to say that is eventually where it's heading?
I think so. And especially now in the industry, there's a lot of buzz around no code or low code environments, which means drag and drop kind of sort of UIs, things that make it easier to create things. And I think that any kind of tool, even outside of just programming, kind of strives for making it easier to do and to create. So I think eventually it will get to that point, but I don't think it necessarily will go away. I just think that the type of work will shift then to creating the things that enable that, right? So you won't have as many programmers going across, all these different, making a website, making mobile applications in these specific languages, but you have a lot of programmers focused on making a program that helps and making those software pieces a lot easier to create.
Okay. So yes, we're moving towards a place where maybe, I'm not going to put a time frame on it, but at some point you might be able to type in English into the computer and it'll know what to do or make. But you're saying that's not going to create a world where there's no job for programming in general. There's always going to be another project, another idea, or another way of simplifying things that would cause a need for programmers, to help things move in this direction where it's simplified for the rest of the world.
Right. And I think on the path to get there, I think the point where it gets to that, where there's not a need for programmers across different languages and the kind of what we're used to right now, it's going to be a long road. And it's going to continuously get better, but until it gets to a really, really good spot, people are going to want customized solutions, because if you try to do a one size fits all thing, you're going to realize that some things don't quite suit your needs. So let's take it like for a mobile app and fitness, for example. A lot of people will probably use a different food tracking, calorie tracking app versus the app they use to track their workouts or to record their data, right? Because maybe there is an app that does both, but maybe it doesn't do both extremely well or to what suits their needs. So until the point that far out in the future, it might be able to do that. But until we get to that road, there's always going to be that demand for those customizations.
Yeah. I just bring it up because I know that there's this focus on learn to code because of artificial intelligence. And, the more you look into it, though, and the more you really think about it, there's actually a lot of developer jobs that could be automatically autonomized by artificial intelligence, whereas a job like a mechanic who comes and fixes your AC unit, it might be a lot longer before we can build a robot that comes to your house that fixes your AC unit. It might be a lot sooner that we could build just a AI agent that can actually type up software into a computer. So I'm not saying that don't learn to code, right? Obviously, like we were saying, it's going to be a long time. There's still going to be a need for developers. I just found it kind of interesting that that might not actually be the safest job ever, right? And that we're sort of moving towards a point where it's abstracting further away from the actual code that's getting written. We're no longer writing with ones and zeros, and maybe we'll no longer need specifically code to create apps. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and that's one thing that it took me a degree to realize is that when we think of traditional programming, you'd say web developer, mobile developer, game developer, things of that nature. That is really important, and there's a lot of different depth you can go into that. But that just kind of scrapes the surface of computer science, and there's so much more, right? And quite honestly, you don't need a degree to be a game developer, web developer, things of that nature. It certainly helps and gives you a lot more context, and it allows you to branch out a lot easier. And there's a lot of different benefits that go on about having a degree with that. But at the end of the day, it's not really the, like you said, safest job out there in the computer science field. So it definitely is kind of up for grabs in that sense when it comes to AI. As if you're looking at the kind of computer science world, that might be one of the first things in the computer science field that does get automated or severely impacted in some way.
We might talk about this a little bit more later, but you've moved into your career in more of a managerial position where you're telling other developers, how to do things and how to code something, right? But as I was saying, you've actually abstracted that to the point where you're using mostly English, right, to manage these people. You might not be writing code in your day-to-day life as much as you used to be. So I think in order to get to a point where you're managing people, or maybe in the future managing AI agents to make an app, right, even if you don't write code, you still might have to take that journey through learning how to code so that you can get to a point where you're effectively using English in a way that can help make an app. I think it's definitely worth anyone who's interested time to learn how to code. And I think that it's going to be a very valuable knowledge, whether or not you're writing code every day in the future, to understand how these processes work. I wouldn't want to just skip out on understanding how an app is created, especially if I want to go into a tech industry. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I really think that that is the inevitable future, but I think at least in our age group's timeline, if it happens, it'll be at the tail end. So I feel like it's definitely important now, and it's important for people to learn that now and to contribute to the growth of technology in general, in a sense, right? Like help push it forward to a point where things are better, and things are more efficient, and kind of propel technology and the human race forward by participating and helping.
Yeah. Maybe learn to code more so that your grandkids don't have to or something. But you think that there's still going to be a large need in the next coming decades to help get it to anywhere near the point I was talking about, where things are just more automated. Okay. Still kind of sticking with your time at college, I know that you started working on several side projects at that time. I think maybe this is kind of a time period that piqued your interest in entrepreneurship. Can we talk about some of your early projects that you built in college?
I remember freshman year of college, I was starting my courses in computer science. I hadn't really done any programming prior to that, and I was taking that intro to programming. And I had always loved the idea of mobile applications, and I was really interested in it. And I wanted to start learning about that because there's not really courses for that in college. There might be one or two offshoots they can find in some colleges, but for most part, right, you're not going to find a specialized degree in that. So I knew that I really wanted to start learning about that. Knew that I wanted to make an application. I knew that I needed to be somewhat simple, right, because this is my first project in mobile application development that I'm journeying down. So I was trying to create an idea that would be useful to me, useful to those around me, which are the time were people in college with me, that was also somewhat simple. So the idea of doing something that I was doing manually when it came time for finals was to figure out what score I needed to make on a final to reach a certain final grade. So you basically, you put in your current grade, you put in how much your final is worth, and then it's going to tell you what you need to make on your final to get X amount of grade. So like, let's say I want to make an A, I'm at a B. So I put in my current grade, and then I put in the final's worth 15%. That's great. You need to make 94 on your final to get an A. And it's like, oh man, I actually don't know if I can do that. But I worked with one of the guys that lived in our dorm room floor, and he was doing the graphical design, the assets for it, and we created it and put it out there. And because it was just like a one-page app, it had one algorithm and it was just one button, we got it out, pretty quickly. But it was such an important step to actually just get it out there, right? Like at that point, it didn't really matter what it was. It was just the fact that, starting a journey and then pushing it out to the world. And that's kind of what lit the fire for the future me, right? To continue down this path of entrepreneurship, creating your own personal ideas, and then continuing down with mobile applications.
It seemed like, I took some computer science classes that could have easily been a project for one of these classes. It seemed like what took this idea a step further is like, okay, let's actually give it a user interface. Let's pick the colors out, the icons and things like that, and put it into a mobile app and put it on the store, right? That was kind of a big leap from anything you'd ever done in class, right?
Right, yeah.
All right, so one of the last things I wanted to talk to you about regarding computer science was your career. Based on what you've told me, it seems like you started off, software development position, and in the past year you've moved up to some sort of management type position. Can you kind of detail that transition?
Yeah, so I started out at my current company by being a web developer. So
what is your current company again?
Accenture.
Okay.
So I work developing software and consulting to federal clients.
Okay.
I started out doing web development, so traditional, just making websites for these clients, basically. I was still working on my side project, which is mobile application development, and part of during that time was also working on Drive, right? And I really wanted that to be kind of my full career because that's what I was really, really passionate about. So I kept doing these side projects, and then there was an opportunity at work to work on mobile development there. And I said, I want to do that because that's what I do in my free time. It's what I love to do. I'm very passionate about it. And I was able to do that transition because I was able to say, hey, look, I'm not just making this up. Like, look at some of my past work. And I transitioned over to the mobile development team. And there I started, I just started taking on more and more responsibility. So I think the big thing that shaped my career was just there was a lot of freedom in a sense, and I was able to kind of shape it how I wanted. And I was kind of able to take charge and to really have a vision and commit to it and get people interested and behind it and lead the team there. And really the switch to what feels like more like a managerial position is from the communication aspect. And that's one of the important pieces if you're interested in tech, but you're also interested in becoming a manager type worker, then you need to be able to bridge the gap between technicalities and the business side or the clients, or even if it's not related to the clients, be able to lead a team of developers, right? So you need to have strong language skills and strong technical skills. That's kind of why this interested me so much, because I had both and I loved both. So I just started using that more and more and started really thinking about ways to push the envelope from a development standpoint and get the clients excited about it and get their support, which in turn gets support from my company, and then it continues to grow from there.
Okay. So working at a big consulting company like Accenture, you basically found it pretty easy, right, to kind of guide your own career. Like, obviously you have to do what the client wants, you have to work at projects the company needs, but with it being such a big company, you were able to navigate these projects in a certain way that allowed you to move into the right kind of skills you wanted to learn. When you moved into mobile, didn't they use Ionic as well? Is that kind of what helped you make that transition?
Yeah, so one of the key mobile applications that my client had was an Ionic app, incidentally enough, which I had just got done working on it with you on Drive, and so I was familiar with it. And they had they have like 8 or 9 different mobile applications, and 2 or 3 of them are written in Ionic, and the rest are in native. So having that skill set definitely helped, because I was able, I released 2 apps back in the day with native, and then I was working with Ionic, so I kind of had a little bit of both.
Best of both worlds. Nice. Okay, and at this point, you said you're in a semi-managerial position, right? What does it take to kind of oversee a team of coders? I know you said great communication. What other aspects of your job, are involved with kind of overseeing coders and communicating what's going on back and forth between them and the client? What are some struggles that you've had, maybe having a coding background instead of more of a business focused background?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things is to kind of separate yourself, being able to envision yourself in the client's position and figuring out what their goals are and try to understand. And I know that you, like me, we're very much like people person in that regard. We like interacting with people. We like talking to people about things. We like helping people or showing off some of our stuff to other people, right? And I took that kind of approach, right? And trying to figure out, really what their goal is and how they want to implement it. And I think one of the biggest challenges for me from a personal standpoint is kind of taking a step back on the actual development, right? It's like being responsible for something that you don't necessarily have your hands in to the fullest anymore. So that's kind of one of the difficult things, is kind of separating yourself from that and then trying to kind of do both things at once and not doing either thing completely fully. But that's where having a great team really comes into play, and choosing the right people.
Okay. So once you understand kind of what the client wants, their needs, their goals, all of that, when you turn back around to your development team, right, how much are you kind of deciding what technologies to use, what frameworks, processes, all of that, and how much are you delegating that to your team? And then what kind of maybe softwares do you use to manage the team, and processes do you, I'm assuming you use an agile process, right, to put out sprints and things like that.
We're a team, so I'm not necessarily making those decisions on my own. I think that's the biggest thing too, as a technical manager, you need to you're not going to be the one, like I said, with your hands in the code all the time. You're not necessarily going to be the one that's developing it all out. So you can make a decision that maybe your team of developers really hates. So it needs to be a group decision. And so really the position is bringing up the options and kind of using that technical background to make those decisions, like I said earlier, about risks, things of that nature, and then hashing it out with your team to make those decisions. And I think that's one aspect of it. But for more the day-to-day, because maybe you guys got that all situated already and you're talking about more of the day-to-day stuff, that's kind of using the agile process, right? Figuring out what the client wants, breaking it down into smaller chunks, and then using the agile process to divvy up that work into 2 weeks time and figuring out what can we get done in 2 weeks and work on that for 2 weeks. And then we take a look at the rest of the stuff that's still to do and then pull out another 2 week chunk. And so that's really helpful.
Do you use Jira, or what kind of software do you use to schedule out these sprints into 2 week periods?
Yeah, so we use Jira for managing the agile development process. So tracking our user stories, which user stories are just basically writing out features of the app that you want to implement. Or maybe it's not even features, maybe it's where you track bugs, things of that nature. Just basically documenting things that need to happen to the code. So we use Jira. We use Confluence, which is a Jira kind of side player, and it allows you to document things. So it's a documentation service, so you can write up your technical documentation that helps onboard new people or things of that nature, and that's really helped. But I think the biggest tool that has helped out is Jenkins, and it doesn't have to be Jenkins, but Jenkins is a CICD pipeline tool. And you want me to go a little more in depth?
Yeah. Explain that.
Yeah. So that is CICD stands for continuous integration and continuous deployment. So what that means basically is that you're continuously developing and you're continuously deploying code. So if you think about a website, for example, they can update a website whenever they want, and when next time you visit it, right, it's updated. And the idea of this continuous integration and continuous deployment is that this happens very, very frequently. Back in the past, there'd be a long gaps before you get, an update that contains a lot of things. But this idea is you're constantly getting an influx of these things as they get finished. So it's not like you're waiting.
So as every feature gets built, there's some sort of check, right, that makes sure it's working well, it works with the rest of the app well, and then that feature gets pushed into the website or the mobile application almost immediately without waiting for like a group of features to all be ready and all pushes like one big update. It's just kind of continuously adding these new features and bug fixes as they are ready.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it's kind of interesting you bring that up with mobile too, because that is actually one of the hard cases to crack, right? Because it's very easy with a website because when you visit it, you get what's there, right? But when it's a mobile device, it works kind of similar to like a desktop application where they have to update their actual application on their phone for it to go through. So that is less continuous necessarily than the web piece. So you can still utilize that, but then you still kind of chunk it up because of that process that's in place, right? Because you got to get Apple to approve it and stuff, and you don't want to send that every single day.
Well, I've noticed more and more that these updates just seem to come on the fly without me actually going in. I remember, when iPhones first were becoming popular, you would have to go in and click update on every single app, or maybe you could even decide, I don't like the new update, I remember Snapchat, there was a huge debacle over an update that people didn't like. But it seems like, maybe I haven't even been paying close attention to it, my phone apps will just update without even telling me. Right? Is that the new way of doing things?
It's pretty wild, right? Like you open your app and it's different, but you didn't download an update. And if you check, some people might have like automatic updates on, but this is not happening because of that. What's happening is they're finding ways to be able to update and do this continuous deployment with a mobile application. And part of that is by making the actual UI and pieces of the app dynamic in the sense that, if you want to change something around, you don't have to deploy a new version of the application out. You just go into your database and you say, oh, I want this header to be up here now, or I want the profile picture to be this big.
Okay.
And it renders dynamically, and it's really powerful and really, really interesting concept.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of information to store in your backend, but I guess it does now give you more and more capabilities to creating changes without deploying a new version or anything. That's really interesting. Okay. Well, is there anything else you want to add about kind of your career advice towards maybe developers that are transitioning between college and their career, as far as finding jobs, getting a footing in, and just kind of how to be successful as a professional software developer?
Yeah, so the first thing, and this kind of goes outside the realm of computer science, but I think it's extremely important with computer science, is to always be learning, always be working on something, to always just ingest that information, especially with computer science, because it's so dynamic. Things change so quickly that you need to be up to date and really just kind of keep working on your side projects. One of the things that led me to get my first job out of college, and I attribute it a lot, is those 2 mobile applications that I put out. It didn't really matter what they were, but the fact that it showed that I had initiative, that I was able to start something without any kind of guidance and see it through. And it tells a lot about a person. And when I'm doing interviews, that's the kind of thing I'm looking for too, because you can tell a lot by a developer by things they do outside of their work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. This side project has definitely kept me continuously learning throughout my end of my college experience and early career, where there's certain times at my job I felt like it's become stagnant, and I'm glad that I've continuously kept, pushing myself. And I think, right, like you said, outside of the computer science field, it should go for anyone that graduating from college is not the end of the road. It's more of like the beginning of your adult education, and that if you do want to become successful, like, you're not going to see payoffs right away, right? But if you continue to grow and educate yourself, many more opportunities are going to open up and arise that you didn't even see coming.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing that I would say is to take ownership of your work. And that's really what led me to the position I am today in my career, and be proud of your work. I know that not everybody's working in their dream job, right? But at the end of the day, this is something that you're spending, 40 hours a week on, maybe even more. And this is kind of like the legacy you're leaving. And even if it's not your passion or not necessarily what you would do, that's still somehow a representation of you. And take ownership and pride in that, and really pour yourself into that. Don't accept subpar work. Just really, really dig into it and really say, look at this. Look at how awesome this is. And really, that's really the key way to separate yourself is caring about that and really putting in the love and effort. And I think that's really important to creating a beautiful product at the end of the day.
No, I couldn't have said it better myself. I agree completely. For those of you who don't know, Blake actually helped out with Drive Fitness for about 6 to 9 months around the summer of 2017. He started around the time Matt Dramazos joined the team, and he really helped us get going and turning what I had into a full-fledged professional level application. I remember 2 areas that Blake really helped out with a lot was designing and building our first API, and then he did a lot of front-end UI interface, so helped the look and feel of the app. So Blake, can you talk a little bit about the state of the app when you first started helping me out, and what your impressions were?
Being, your friend and being in your life, you got to see the journey up to the state when I joined. So even before then, and prior to my joining, it was a front-end application, and it was using Firebase as the back end. And it was utilizing a lot of things done on the client side. So there wasn't a lot of separation of concerns. And what that means basically is you want to keep things separated to keep them lightweight and small and manageable, right? So to make your app feel snappy, responsive, and to keep it maintainable for in the future when you want to continue building upon it, you kind of want to split these things out so they're, it's not all or nothing type of deal. You can make changes here or there without affecting other pieces. And one of the issues that kind of come with Firebase, which is a back-end mobile tool to help people get up and running quickly, is that it does get you up and running quickly, but if you don't really know how to structure it properly, or if you don't do certain things in a certain way, it can be more of a liability sometimes. And there are some issues that I remember you running into, and I tried to help debug there right before I joined. And then when I I jumped in full force, we had a discussion about kind of changing up the way that it works and kind of splitting that out. So there is, the front end application, and then there is the piece of software that runs the computational stuff and the storing of data and things of that nature.
For anyone who doesn't know, right, any application that needs to store your user's data is going to have a database. And I was basically putting code in the front end of the app that would directly access the data in the database. And so I think what Blake is getting at, that causes a big problem, right? Because every time that anything needs to be tweaked, right, it's all done in the front end, right? So there's just a lot of computation being done all together. It's hard to separate it out and focus on these problems separately. It also means that in the app on your phone, right, there's a lot of just code in there. It makes the app, larger. It makes it run slower. It causes a lot of performance problems, right, when you're having all of these direct calls to the database being done literally from, the phone itself instead of on another location. So you helped us design an API, right? And that's taking a lot of those calls and putting them somewhere else, right? Can you kind of explain a little bit, if I haven't done it well enough, what an API is?
Yeah, so an API, it's a communication point, an integration point. So what that means is it basically serves as a set of rules to allow one piece of software to talk to another piece of software. So this kind of is a bridge in a way to connect, like you said, the front end to the database, but it allows for that bridge to be modified or that bridge to be changed without having to make a change to the front end necessarily, depending on the type of change that we're talking about. And so it serves a lot of purposes in that sense, because if you really wanted to make some minor changes, having to deploy an update to the app every single time can get annoying from the developer standpoint or from the user standpoint. Whenever time they open their phone, there's a new update available. So by separating it out, it allows you to only change and redeploy, which means pushing it out to the world to use when it's needed, and you don't have to needlessly push out to everything or push out to users and interfere with their user experience. So it's really just about creating a way for the front end, the app to talk to the database and separate it out.
Along with, it just being separated out, right? If you put all that code on the front end, right, that code is going to be duplicated and it's going to sit on every user's device, where now there's just one place where the code sits. I think we uploaded it to Amazon, and now every user is essentially calling on these algorithms that are only in one place. They don't need to be, separated out for every single user, right? So it's a nice condensed way of having just condensing code in general. So it's not duplicated for every user. And then another thing that Matt kind of explained to me, which is cool about an API, is that say there was another company, right, and they wanted to build like dashboards with our data. Now we can say, oh, here's our API. If you want to mess around with the Drive Fitness data, we can give you access, and you can call these functions now. And it could allow for us to connect to other applications and platforms in the future, and kind of do more with our data than just the Drive Fitness app itself.
Yeah, and another great example of that possibility is if you stayed the Firebase approach, right? Like all that data and all that code inside the front end application. Let's say that you wanted to create a Drive Fitness website, you would kind of have to recreate a lot of that same code. But by separating it out, that bridge, that talking point, can be used for both the mobile application and the website. So it reduces the amount of work that you have to do. It reduces the amount of code duplication, because the issue with that is, if let's say you find a bug that you need to fix and you have code duplicated for both the website and for the mobile application, well, now you have to go update and deploy to both of those instead of just deploying it once to this talking piece and this mouthpiece.
I was thinking at some point you might want to do like a Apple TV app or just like a smart TV type of app for anyone who works at home, right? Same there, right? Now the app, the TV, the watch, the website, all of these are communicating through our API. and it's really just condensing the amount of code and just kind of expanding our capabilities as a software company to the different products we can put out. I guess you would recommend any other company that's starting a complex mobile application to consider creating an API, separating out, the front end from the back end logic.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that you don't really get taught that at college, right? You don't really understand how these enterprise and these industry level mobile applications or websites work. And it's something that the only reason that I was able to think about and talk about that was because I was doing it at work, and then bringing that concept to my own personal projects and bringing that to Drive. And it's really kind of just how these huge apps and websites work, right? Where Instagram doesn't do all the writing logic right there on the app itself. It says, hey, Instagram backend, here's my photo, please upload it to the database, and it takes care of that. And allows a lot of flexibility. And like I said, one of the things about it is the extensibility, right? When you start out with software development, you don't really know where the future is. And by having it split out like that, it gives you a lot of flexibility in how you want to progress. And for example, let's say you hosted it on AWS like you were talking about, and one day AWS ups how much it charges you by 50%, and it's just ridiculous, and you want to switch it out to a different cloud provider such as Azure or the Google Cloud, then you can do that without any interruption to the mobile device. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, and I think it's really important to kind of keep that in the back of your mind whenever you're starting out, and not just from the higher level infrastructure and talking over the network, but even inside the most simple pieces of the code itself. Think about that in the back of your mind as you write code and develop your idea.
When it came to the Drive Fitness API, I know you helped us decide on using a Java Spring Boot backend. Can you explain a little bit about your decision and how you arrived at choosing, that language and that framework to build our backend, and maybe any lessons you learn or recommendations on how someone else might want to do this?
Software development kind of has this weird, because it's so dynamic, the thing that you do today would not be the same thing that you do 2 weeks from now, right? So it's all about choosing what you think is the right decision then and now, and choosing based off risks, based off your own knowledge, based off the time that it would take to implement things. So the decision behind the Java Spring Boot as the tech stack for the backend was A, I used it at work. B, I really liked using Java over other possible implementations. So earlier when we were talking about programming languages, I have a lot of experience in Java because as we were talking about college, that's kind of where I got my start.
And also Matthew Jamazos knew a lot in Java too, right? So I think that was sort of a shared language between the two of you, and we were focused more on time and efficiency instead of necessarily picking maybe a little bit better of a language, but everyone would have had this big learning curve.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that kind of goes into when you're building an idea and you have to make a choice about the technical implementation. Those are just kind of some things you got to think about, right? What language is my team skilled in? What is the risk of choosing this language? Is it a well-supported language? Is it kind of brand new and still kind of getting its start? Does it have longevity? For example, Java's been around for a very long time, so it's a pretty safe choice. Another important piece is where can this application run, right? So imagine a iOS mobile application that only runs on iOS, right? It doesn't necessarily run on an Android device. You can't do that. It doesn't run on your computer. Where Java can run on a lot of different things. So it can run on a Mac system. It can run on Windows. It can run on Linux or any variation of Unix. So all of these kind of things help you make the decision of what to implement and should be considered when you're choosing your tech stack.
Do you have any other observations as far as how to build a fully functioning mobile app, right, that a professional company like Instagram would, that separates out, right, different components and kind of how to layer that all together? Is there anything else you wanted to share regarding kind of your knowledge on how all these different pieces like operate and work together with each other, and how someone should go about designing them?
The big thing is separation, right? And how you do that separation or what technology is kind of on an individual basis. It depends on what you're building, but that should be at the forefront of what you're doing. And I think that as far as how you set up your project and how you make something that is this industry standard, it is this really polished thing, is going to be a very much learning process, and it's going to take some time to get there, because especially when it's talking about, you know, Facebook level of users and infrastructure, it's this huge thing, and there are a million different parts, and you learn about one thing and then you realize there's more. Like what we're talking about here is a step in the right direction, but it goes even way deeper and way further, and there are way more pieces to help combat other various problems that come up. So I think the first step is kind of that separation of creating an API and then creating the front end client, and then from there, as you go forward, learn more and more about the various pieces that can help and enhance, and figure out if it's the right fit for you, right? Don't do things just because it might be interesting or might be a buzzword. Really think about, okay, what benefit is this going to provide me? Is this the right use case? Because at the end of the day, people are going to have opinions about different languages or different frameworks, and really it's up to you as an individual to figure out and decide what is the right piece for my team or for my idea, and then you start the learning process on that. But I think that API splitting up is a great first start, and will get you down that road and gives you a lot for a little amount of time.
I remember another point that you kept bringing up around this time is like scalability. I was using Firebase, which uses a MongoDB style backend, which maybe you can sort of explain in a minute. And Blake wanted to move towards an SQL database. It has basically better relationships between certain parts and tables of the database. A big point with all that is you're worried about scalability. So essentially, the app's performance wasn't great. You know, it would take maybe a couple seconds for things to load, which is actually kind of a long time period on the front end. But you were worried that if we had maybe 10,000 users, it was going to take forever to load, right? The way I was structuring these calls to the backend wasn't going to scale up well. So you really liked AWS, I remember, because say essentially we just had too much traffic. There was ways to, I think, duplicate it, right? And just have like 2 instances of our database running. Essentially, it was going to be flexible moving towards a large amount of users on the application. So can you kind of detail the difference between a MongoDB style database and SQL, if I haven't done it well enough, and then why you thought the move towards SQL and AWS made Drive Fitness much more scalable than it was?
This is a very deep topic, and a lot of people are very passionate about this particular topic. So to set the context, MongoDB at its core is a NoSQL database. And you also have this concept of SQL database, and that's just structured query language. So NoSQL means there's no structured query language. There's no structure. So the concept of these NoSQL databases is that you have really malleable data. So you're able to change it really easily. You're able to, okay, actually, you know what? There's a new attribute for the user profile. We're going to add in, you know, this data point for users. It's really easy to do that when you have NoSQL, because there's no set in stone structure. But the cost of it is that it's very difficult thing to manage, right? So the structured query language provides you the benefit of a logical kind of relationship mapped layout, and it's kind of easy to draw the picture and imagine, right? Like you can imagine I'm a user, and if I'm, like, say, buying from something online, right? I have a checkout. There's various items that I'm linking to, and it points to those various items in different places in data. Now, at a really high level, I will say that NoSQL databases can scale just as easily, and in a lot of cases in industry, when we're talking about Facebook or we're talking about Instagram, NoSQL is the actual preferred way, but it's a lot easier to mess it up and to not make it as scalable or as efficient. I think once you go down that route, you have to be knowledgeable on. So that's why I think SQL is a way more manageable and approachable, especially when you're, you know, doing something for the first time in the first journey. And that provides you the benefit, and it's still scalable, right? It's like you were talking about, you can still spin up multiple instances, you can still do things to make it scalable. But from a fresh start kind of standpoint, it's really easy, and it's something that people have been using for years, and there's a lot of documentation on it. Whereas with a NoSQL database, it's new, cutting edge technology. There's not as many resources on, and it's a harder concept to grasp. And there's a lot of little consequences of doing that, but there's benefits as well.
Interesting. Okay, so moving towards the front end of the application, we use a framework called Ionic, and with a tool called Cordova, it essentially allows us to code as if it was like a website. As me and Blake were talking about earlier, this website language using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, except for this tool, right? It'll essentially generate that website code and let us put out a iOS app or an Android app, right? This is kind of like the final step. So this makes it really convenient for us to have just one code base instead of two, both for iOS and Android. It also helped us because we have a limited amount of developers and a limited amount of time. So we didn't have to repeat any steps in order to get out two different applications. So I was a pretty big fan of this. I learned it in one of my ISAT courses near the end of my college experience. So Blake, when you started working with us, what was your impression of Ionic? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? And what was your whole impression of putting out multi-platform apps regards to the native iOS or the native Android code bases?
First, we can talk about like my experience then and my thoughts then, and then we can kind of transition to my thoughts now after a couple of years in the industry. When I was looking at it, because at that point when I was starting to work on and play around with Drive, I had released 2 apps in the iOS App Store. And this hybrid framework, this Ionic, this was the first time that I had seen it, and it was really interesting. And it's really, we talked about magic earlier when it comes to computers, and that's another thing that almost seems magical, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you write HTML code and then it becomes a mobile application? And it's really, really powerful in that sense. And you brought up a lot of good points and a lot of reasons why it's so important and so powerful. The fact that you don't have 2 separate code bases you have to worry about. You're not building an app for an iOS phone and building an app for an Android. You're building one. You have a small team, so your time is limited, right? Those are all benefits of it. But like most things in the world, there are pros and cons to each thing. So some of the things that I didn't like about it was you lose a lot of micro level interactions, right? It makes it a little more difficult if you were doing a complex app. If you were trying to integrate with like the camera, or if you're trying to get Bluetooth, like various things of that nature. And this is where another thing people are very passionate about, right? Like native versus hybrid. And again, I kind of go back to the concept of choosing the technology that best suits you, your team, your goal, your vision, what have you. And in your case, right, that's the perfect thing. It's something that you can develop on with one code base, with limited developers. They don't have to learn a new language if they already know web languages, and you get an Android and an iOS app. And that's really, really powerful. And there's a reason why that's becoming so popular, and the shift is going towards that. But it does come at a cost, which can, in some cases, be like harder to get up and running. I know that we ran into a lot of like dependency issues, and sometimes it's hard to get it to actually run or to compile down. But overall, it's really impressive piece of framework that allows you to do that.
I definitely enjoyed it as far as the user input app, getting it off the ground, getting my idea out there. I think that's part of the reason why you and Matt wanted to work with me, is just because I was able to put an idea out into the world so quickly, right? Without much knowledge of coding in general. As I've been progressing forward, right, and I'm starting to play around with the idea of actually connecting to like a smart pair of dumbbells or a cardio machine or your watch, right, which is kind of the Drive Fitness vision. You're right. It is harder to make Bluetooth connections from this multi-platform language. It's been challenging, and I think that could be a big problem with it in the future. I'm hoping that as it develops and it becomes more of an industry standard, that there are easier ways to connect to Bluetooth and other devices. But it's definitely something that I get concerned about as far as like the long-term vision of the software. You know, I could definitely see that being a reason why someday we have to move towards a native app. So hopefully not. we're not quite ready yet anyways, but that is something I do worry about.
Well, and so one thing that they try to do to negate that, right, is the ability to, so for those of you that don't know Ionic, it basically, there's a package for Bluetooth interaction that you can install and you can use to have your app interact with that. There's one for the camera, there's one for GPS, things of that nature. And if one of those don't suit your needs, this is complicated stuff, but you can build your own, right? So you could keep your Ionic app, and then you could build your own. Okay, here's my iOS Bluetooth package, and here's my Android one, and then still have it link up. But again, that's pros and cons to that as well.
Yeah.
But it definitely is, long term, when it comes to hybrid, is something that is talked about to this day. So Airbnb got rid of all their React Native, which is another hybrid framework like Ionic, in favor of going natively. And there are a lot of other kind of industry leaders that have done the same, but there's also some that push forward. So for example, if you ever heard of Discord, it's a messaging platform, kind of like Slack, but for gamers and for the gaming community. That mobile application is built completely with React Native, which is another hybrid framework. And it's kind of impressive when you think about it. You're like, wow, I would have never guessed that, because they do it so well. So it's something that you should be thinking about, but I think there are ways around it. So I think time will tell kind of what path you have to take.
Yeah, I think we're going to start putting GPS into the app for like tracking if you're just running around like your neighborhood. So that might be one of our first challenges, to see how well that GPS plugin works and how it kind of appears on iOS versus Android. I'm hoping that one at least they've worked all the kinks out. So the last thing that kind of you focus on the app was a lot of UI improvements. For those of you who have used the app, Blake actually designed like the login page and some of those like home screen images and just the layout there, which I think looked beautiful. What were some challenges? What did you learn about UI development during that time period? Do you have any like quick tips for people, when it comes to using CSS and certain styling techniques?
To design that, I had to think about a couple of different things. You had to think about the app itself, right? What makes the most sense from a logistic standpoint, from a user flow standpoint, what makes the best user experience, and then think about kind of modern examples. So one of the biggest things, and I think it goes this way with art or anything, right? Draw inspirations, looking at other workout applications, seeing how they do things, and then figuring out something that solves your problem and is unique. And so it started out with just drawing it on a piece of paper and then kind of going in there. And talking about CSS, right? Like I'm sure you've experienced this, where you change things and then maybe nothing happens, or it's really hard. Maybe there's just like one issue and you're trying to get that one thing lined up, and it's really hard. So it's a lot of trial and error, right? Like it's a lot of just, all right, let me increment this number by one, and let me keep doing that until I figure out what's going on or solves the problem.
Yeah, I don't know if you taught me how to do this or where I learned this, but I think if you're new to CSS and troubleshooting problems that way, the way you got to do it is you got to go into like the Google Chrome developer tools, right? So as he was saying, sometimes you write some CSS, and because there's so many different rules layered into your app on the different pages and everything, that styling might not hit the right point and might not change the color or the size the way you want it to. So instead of changing the code, compiling it, and taking a look at it every time, you can actually go into the developer tools and you can edit all the CSS variables right there, right? So you can change values on the fly and experiment with the way different things look without actually changing your code base. You're just kind of like making changes in the browser, to kind of test things out. And then once you find out what you like, then you can go put it into your code base, so that you don't have to waste time essentially compiling your app every time you want to test a new style.
Yeah.
So I think that would be my biggest advice as far as how to work with styling. But
yeah, and also too, that's one of the benefits of Ionic, right? Like that's not something I can do when I'm doing native development.
Yeah.
And also one thing to keep in mind too, though, is if you make those changes and you got your UI perfect, don't refresh the page without tracking all you've done. Because I've definitely done that a few times where I'm like, oh man, what did I write? Because I need to go copy it in the actual code base now. So just keep a track while you're doing that. But that's absolutely, and that's how you do it on website design too. If you're not just a mobile application, is that Chrome developer tool is the most important thing a web developer has at their disposal.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously I had you on as a technical guest. The focus of this episode is not really about fitness, but can we talk a couple minutes to talk about your own fitness journey?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing that really piqued my interest with your fitness journey, not to point any fingers, but it seemed like you got a little bit out of shape, right? Your first couple years out of college. And I actually had the same problem where like right out of college, I was, trying to work on this app. I was, working a full-time job for 40 hours a week. Seems like a lot of people run into that problem, and it seemed like in the past year you've actually managed to lose a lot of weight and kind of get back into shape. So what was your experience? What was it like for your fitness journey, right, in your first couple years of your career, and what did you do to kind of get back into shape?
Yeah, no, and I think that you really hit the nail on the head, right? It's difficult, right, when you're working 40 hours a week and you're not used to it fresh out of college, right? And then also at the same time, I was living on my own for the very first time, and I didn't quite have my routine down, and things were just different, right? And it puts challenges in that sense. And I think one of the things that really made it difficult was just the energy and the time, and that's kind of really what put me in this mindset of not being happy. And it's kind of like a cycle, right, where you don't feel good about yourself, and that makes it harder to go and improve yourself, right? Like it's vicious. But I got to a point where once I kind of got the swing of things when it comes to having a career, that I realized that I could start incorporating this more and more. And the thing about it too is it's not going to look the same as it did for college for a lot of people. It's going to be different because your time is more limited. Maybe you don't have access to the same kinds of gyms that you did in college. And that was the key part, was for me, was adapting. And what that looked like for me was starting to take a bigger interest in cardio. So I was finding my mind wandering during strength training, and it was really hard to really keep my mind from pacing, and that was dragging out even longer, and I had limited time. So I really enjoyed just doing an activity that really kept me focused, and it didn't allow for me to kind of do that. So the key aspect was finding something that fit both something that made me happy, something that fit my time schedule, and then also adjusting the way that I ate, because I think that's the biggest piece of it too, is making sure that you're not putting trash in your body, right? Because you feel better, and even if you just did that alone, you would see such a great benefit, not only just to your physical health, but your mental health as well.
I think that's a great point about cardio and strength training and how your mind would wander, because I have a similar issue, right, where, as we were just saying beforehand, we focus on continuous learning. We're always focusing on kind of improving our technical skills and our career and stuff like that. And not only I think cardio could kind of take your mind off of things, but I've also found with a good podcast, right, or maybe an audio book, that I can actually do focused learning for long periods of time on the cardio machine while I'm running, right? And I'm not necessarily jumping between weight training sets and a topic of technology or something on my phone. I'm actually integrating both at the same time, and cardio really freed me up to learn while I'm at the gym, which if you're someone who struggles with time, I mean, I've started getting into audiobooks as well. There's a lot you can learn, right, just by listening while doing cardio, where weight training you might need, right, music, or you might get distracted, or it's just kind of a different energy than cardio. And especially transitioning from college to the adult world, I think both of us could kind of stay pretty thin in college just lifting weights based off of our young boy bodies, I guess, to put it. But once you start getting into this stage of your life, your metabolism slows down and you no longer can stay thin by just lifting. And it's hard to strike up that balance. I definitely have gone through periods where I'm only running, and then now I'm losing muscle mass. And it's definitely been a challenge for me to juggle both at the same time. They're just very different activities. It's hard to flip-flop between the two of them. I think I want to talk a little bit more about diet, because that's something I still struggle with today. I can definitely cut down on things. It's hard for me to transition into healthier foods. Like, what kind of specific foods were you eating that led to a healthier diet, and how did you transition over?
I have to give credit where credit is due. I had really great inspiration. So my girlfriend is a fitness instructor, and she's also a vegetarian, and she is very much conscious about what she puts in her body. And that really inspired me, both from the working out perspective, right? That was inspiring me, got me there. But really, she inspired me to start eating cleaner and healthier. So the transition period for me was not necessarily something radical, but it was just I started watching what she was eating, and as I was eating more with her, I started taking those habits slowly back into me when I'm off on my own, right? So maybe, she has strawberries on hand, and I'm like, oh, I forgot how good strawberries are, right? Because it's harder when it's you're on your own, like, to think about that. When you're growing up, like, sometimes you just have that in the fridge and it's just there. But to actually consciously make that decision to go and get it is a little more difficult. So it was definitely like a slow process of just finding things that I liked, and then just pulling them into my repertoire of what I'm eating. And she really helped me figure out what those things are that make me feel good enough to go out and do it on my own.
No, that's a real interesting point, and I feel like it might feel to other people like, oh, well, I don't have a vegetarian girlfriend. This is not advice for me. But you choose who's in your what kind of people are in your life, your friends and everything. Especially when you get out of college, it's not just like, oh, these people were on my dorm. This is who I hang out with. You start, you only have a certain amount of time for people, and you start getting really selective about your friends and the people that you spend time with. And, a great way to get healthier, both, fitness-wise and diet-wise, is to pick friends that are good influences on you. Pick people, hang out with people that care about their health, they care about diet, and that kind of stuff will rub off on you, right? If you're eating dinner with these people 2 times a week, you're gonna choose healthier options, than if you have friends that are eating fast food and etc. Since neither of us are experts in diet, the least we can do is pick some people in our lives who do care about that, who do push us right in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially too because we, at least for me anyway, I'm a product of my environment. A lot of times I adapt really well, but it also means like I could be adapting the wrong way, right? So if I'm living or hanging out with someone that isn't doing the healthiest activities, I will follow suit. So that was a great thing that you brought that up, because that's, how you better yourself if you're someone like that, right? Just pick and choose and surround yourself with people that inspire you and that will help push you, that you want to be more like, right?
Yeah.
Spend your time with someone that if you look at someone and you say, I don't want to be more like that person, that's probably not somebody you want to be spending your limited amount of time with. So really think about that.
Wow. Definitely true. Hopefully I'm not ending any friendships with that message, but sometimes you have to focus on yourself, and pick the right people. So a lot of what I'm doing is trying to build cool software, cool technology for the future of fitness. What kind of activities would you like to see improve through technology in your fitness life?
So one thing for me is an easier tracking process, and that's kind of what at the end game of Drive Fitness, and something that you're very passionate about doing. I think it needs to be something that's you don't even have to think about, right? Like it just happens, and I think that's definitely going to be the future, because we're always making things easier and just more automatic, and that's just going to naturally follow suit when it comes to the fitness world. One thing that I am really interested in seeing, if this ever plays out to its fullest, is the same kind of deal, but more on a physical body level, getting more statistics and insight into your own personal physical health. So take, for example, like body fat percentages, right? There's a lot of different ways to get that number, but at the end of the day, most people only have access to the calipers that aren't really super scientific, right? They just kind of like pinch your skin and you base it off of that. So it'd be really, really interesting to see, if there's a way to track a little more and to see things a lot easier. So I can see a graph of my overall physical health over time, whether it's body fat percentage or caloric intake. I really would like a way to track what I'm eating, way more automated than it currently is. But I think one day we'll see something where we kind of get stats about ourselves a lot easier. And I don't necessarily know how that will happen, but I think that would be a great thing to see implemented.
Yeah, I think that tracking your diet automatically is going to be much more challenging than tracking your workouts, right? Which feeds into your body health. Like, obviously, you could scan in maybe like a picture of everything before you eat it, but if you forget a couple items of the day, then all of a sudden your whole tracker is going to think that you're a little bit healthier than you are, right? It's really kind of got to be with diet. It's definitely got to be an all or nothing situation, where if if you even lie to it or don't scan in a couple of Pop-Tarts a day, it's not going to do a good job of knowing everything you're consuming and predicting and giving you better advice, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know, maybe some sort of nanobots that like literally like sit in our, you know, our body's systems and understand all of these data points that you're talking about. It will be a necessary thing, you know, to fully understanding our health and what's going on in our bodies. But yeah, that's super interesting. That's definitely even further down the road than I think some other people and I have talked about on the podcast as far as like ideas go. But yeah, it's the technology is not quite there, right, to scan our bodies and give us that precise feedback about what is going on, you know?
Yeah, and I think for a short term, something that I'd be interested in is kind of the workout and the training feedback and the automated tracking, but maybe for flexibility. It'd be really great because something as I got older and, you know, now that we're not lifting as much and we're experimenting cardio, that's realized I was like, oh, wow, I'm not flexible at all, actually. And I think it'd be really cool to see kind of that in some sort of statistical form where I can see like whether maybe I do an activity and it measures stuff. I know there are some ways like back in the day where you try to push a board and things like that, but seeing that and then offering feedback on how to increase your weaknesses and flexibility. Maybe I'm, you know, not very flexible in my hamstring, so here's some workouts and see my improvement over time in that sense, in a more automated fashion.
Yeah, weight training is definitely easier to say, oh, I went up by 20 pounds, or I can do, you know, 5 more reps than I used to be able to do, or like my chest is literally bigger than it was last year, right? There's a lot more metrics that can be grabbed easily from strength training, even cardio, right? Both of those. But when it comes to flexibility, that machine they had in PE class where you can figure out how far your hands go out is really the only machine that I know of that I can easily incorporate into the app, right? That can actually give you a good metric on how flexible you are, and that's just, you know, one type of stretch,
right?
And yeah, I've gone back and forth a lot about, like, for me, I might just want to add to the app, I did 20 minutes of stretching. Someone else might actually want to add in every single like stretch that they did across that time period. You know, I want to make the app flexible for the person that wants to know every little stretch and the person that just wants to do, I did an hour of yoga, you know, because that's, you can do a lot of different stretching exercises in a short amount of time. It would be a lot for you to manually keep track of, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know how we solve that goal of kind of, I think that would maybe feed back into scanning your body and having some sort of feedback system that tells you how flexible you are, or creating more tests like that machine that can tell you how flexible, I guess, your hamstrings are.
Right.
The app doesn't focus as much on stretching at the moment as some of these other areas, but that's because of these difficulties I've laid out, not because I don't think stretching is important, right? I think it's a harder thing to track, but it's just as important as strength training or cardio or, you know, any other aspect of fitness.
Right.
And something on a personal level I think I need to focus on.
So one thing that I've been really interested in and I've been enjoying doing is I went to a soul cycle class, a cycle bar class. And that was a very interesting experience. I'd never done cycling before, and I went because you get like your first class free, and you are in a room with a bunch of people, and it keeps track of your metrics. And there's like a leaderboard, and there's all these crazy LEDs and crazy music, and the instructor is also kind of DJing. But it was really cool to come off of that, and then you get a push notification and an email with your stats of that, and you can also see your stats over time. And I think there's going to be value in the idea of gamification at a group level in a sense like that. And I think that's going to be something, because it's already so popular, these group-based workouts, because, you know, as we're talking about motivation problems and other things that keep people from working out, you know, it's hard to not be motivated when you're in a room with an instructor with 30 other people, right? It definitely helps. So I think that technology is going to get better and better, and it's going to be way more interesting than it is now. It's going to be really cool.
Yeah, that sounds like exactly what I want to do with strength training, right? But applied to the cycling class. I've heard some good things about cycling, especially with these group classes, right? I think it's strength training, everyone might be, you know, kind of in their own playing field about what they need to focus on. But for cycling, right, everyone can kind of control their own resistance, and then everyone can follow along and do exactly what the instructor is you know, telling you to do. So yeah, definitely with a leaderboard and everything, that sounds, right on the money, Drive Fitness style workout.
Yeah, definitely.
As we mentioned earlier, you helped me a lot in the early days of Drive Fitness, including, doing some real development with us, summer 17. And then in recent years, you have focused your efforts on a new mobile application. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is.
And I know, we had a lot of other things to talk about today, but can we expect that mobile application sometime in the next year or two? And you interested in coming back on the show and talking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the most ambitious project that I've personally done to date, where I'm really trying to push the envelope. And I think it's coming along nicely. I think we're going to be ready for beta testing very soon, probably. And it's something that I'm really excited about because, as I was saying earlier, you kind of learn about things and then you're like, maybe I would have done something differently if I had known what I had known when I started this. And I felt like I've learned a lot recently, and this is a result and a brainchild of that. So I'm really excited to see how this plays out when it gets out into the world.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess this will be a little to be continued moment. I'm really looking forward to when you guys put your beta tests out. I'm looking forward to having you back on, talking about that app, and also having your partner on. We'll do two episodes, maybe interview both of you once you guys are ready to launch.
Yeah, it sounds like a great time, and especially both in the realm of mobile applications, right? I think there's a lot of value to be gained from sharing because we're up against giants when you're talking about things like Instagram or Uber, these large scale enterprise apps, being able to share and kind of collaborate and share what did and didn't work. And I think it's going to make both of our apps way better.
All right, great. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today. I appreciate you sharing with us all your knowledge.
Thanks. I appreciate it. It was a great time being here and talking about it, especially something that I was able to actually participate in and spend some time doing. So it's, this is personal for me, not just from you being a very, very good friend, but also because, I've actually touched the code base at some point, and it's really awesome to see how far you guys have progressed and how much better each iteration is. And that's really inspiring because I know how hard it is, right? So it's been great to see your progress, and I know it's only going to continue to improve.
Yeah, no, we definitely obviously appreciate you on the podcast, but we appreciate all the work you've done for Drive and all the advice that you've continued to give us throughout the years. It's been extremely valuable for our company. So thank you, and yeah, have a good day.
You too.